Our second reading this morning comes from John chapter 10, and we're going to read verses 11 to 21 together. These are the words of Jesus. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheepfold. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. The Jews who heard these words were again divided. Many of them said, "He is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him?" But others said, "These are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?"
Good morning. Good to see you all. Morning. I don't know about you, but I've often found there's been times when I've seen sheep and often been surprised by how silly they are. A few weeks ago, I was cycling in the peaks and about to climb up a steep hill, and there was loads of traffic, and it's just loads of sheep just crossing the road blindly, as if they didn't have a care in the world. Did I not know it's a busy road? And I remember another time I was running back in Durham. I remember seeing a sheep get his head stuck through the fence by trying to eat some grass on the other side, but I couldn't understand because there was loads of grass on another side, the side he was on. He must have thought the grass was greener, I guess. But as far as I'm aware, sometimes, maybe you could think of examples where you see sheep be a bit dumb or seem a bit silly. But as far as I'm aware, sheep are not an endangered species on the World Watch List. But how do they survive? I guess it's because we have farmers and shepherds looking after them, caring for them. Their flourishing and their thriving is not dependent on their ability, but utterly dependent upon the competence of a shepherd looking after them and caring for them. So I don't know about you, but when we hear Jesus say that he is the good shepherd, as we just heard, read in the reading, I find that such a comfort, because I know that I so often can be like those sheep, prone to wander off and get lost, having no idea what I truly need, where I'm going, and what is best for me, and going off in my own way. And Jesus isn't just any shepherd, but rather he describes us as the good shepherd that cares for us. And the Greek word here, I was reading about in commentaries, is actually kalos, and that could be interpreted as beautiful, noble, or perfect. So I guess that's what I want us to look at together this morning, is what makes Jesus such a beautiful, noble, and good shepherd, and how that can give us such confidence and security that actually our flourishing and thriving isn't dependent on us or our own ability to look after ourselves, but actually utterly dependent on him and his goodness and his ability to look after us. So that's something we're going to unpack a bit together this morning. So the first way I think we could see how Jesus is this good, noble, perfect, beautiful shepherd is that he's a shepherd that knows his sheep. In Middle Eastern times, shepherds would actually give their sheep nicknames as a way of identifying them. They were calling names like maybe like Long Nose or, I don't know, Fluffy. I guess they're all fluffy, but he'd give them unique nicknames that would identify them as a way of knowing them, because the shepherd would know his sheep. How much more does God know us? How much more does God know our name? He formed us, he knitted us together in our mother's womb, and he's not like the hired hand, but actually he's the owner of the sheep that cares about us, and he invites us into that intimacy. In the passage we just read, it says, Jesus says, "I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father." The intimacy the shepherd has with his sheep is likened in this passage to the kind of intimacy God has with Jesus. Wow. The shepherd's concern and interest in the sheep is contrasted with the hired hand, who in contrast is distant, detached, aloof from the sheep. There's suggestions here, perhaps the hired hand has ulterior motives, maybe he's in it for money, or But Jesus is not like that. Jesus takes interest in us. He cares about the little details of our lives. In fact, he knows how many hairs are on our head. He's not passive in knowing us, but actively takes delight in searching us. Psalm 139 gives us just a beautiful glimpse of how much God delights in knowing us. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my goings out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. If he knows us and cares for us this much, we don't need to know where we're going. We don't need to understand or know it all, because we can trust that he knows what's best for us, what we truly need, because he knows us better than we know ourselves. Therefore, we can say with confidence that we heard in Psalm 23, because the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, because he has our best interests at heart. I remember a few years ago being really reminded of this simple truth of how much Jesus really knew me. I was going into a church weekend away back at uni, and I basically went into the weekend kind of really wanting God to kind of give me more clarity about where I was going, because to be honest, I didn't really know. And at the start of the weekend, there was the speaker for the weekend, just after the worship, began to just share prophetic words and encouragements with people, what he sensed God was saying. And the amazing thing was that he hadn't met any of us in the room. And he began to share a word for me. And it was quite a simple image of me building a steam locomotive part by part. And he also talked about him seeing the fire being lit and how that also lit other fires. And there was an uproar of laughter in the room, which I think the speaker was a bit worried by at first. But actually, it was because people knew how spot on the word was. So what he didn't know was that I have quite a rogue interest in steam trains that comes from my granddad. And I was also studying engineering. And also, people often describe me as passionate. And I remember in that moment just being blown away, like, wow, Jesus really knows me. And yeah, in some ways, I didn't get the revelation that I wanted of where perhaps more greater clarity in where I was going. But actually, I would see something even greater, that actually it was okay. I didn't need to know it all. Actually, I could know in part and be comfortable in that, because I could be confident that he fully knows me. The comfort here is that he knows us so intimately. That also comes with a challenge, I guess. How do we know the shepherd? Because relationship works both ways. Jesus says, I know my sheep and my sheep know me. I wonder, do we seek to really know him, to really know his heart, to really know what moves Jesus' heart, to really know what delights him, to really know what he cares about? When the shepherd comes close, do we invite him in or do we run away? Do we invite him close into those messy and broken places of our hearts that we'd rather run away from? Isaiah talks about God's heart as a shepherd. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. I wonder, are we open to him carrying us close to his heart? Or is our own pride of walking in our own strength resisting from allowing him to carry us? Do we allow him to shepherd us and really know us deeply? Because there's this promise that as we draw close to him, he draws even closer to us. How much do we really know him? How much do we allow the shepherd to really know us? The second way we really see Jesus as this good, beautiful, perfect shepherd is that he guides us step by step. He guides us into real life. Earlier on in the passage in John 10, it says, when he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they'll never follow a stranger. In fact, they'll run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. In verse 16, it also says, I have other sheep that are not of his sheep, and I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. And then in Psalm 23, we also saw this theme of a shepherd guiding his sheep. It says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. He's a good guide. He goes before us, and he guides us in the right paths. And it's for his name's sake, and I find that such a comfort, because it's yes about our faithfulness and following, but so much more about his faithfulness and leading us. And sometimes he may not show us the whole path, but you know what? He's always faithful to show us the next step in his timing. And our eyes don't need to be fixed on the destination, but actually when our eyes are fixed on the shepherd. And I think there's also a challenge because when he guides us, his leadership may not always be comfortable. So in Psalm 23, we also saw this image of your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And a shepherd's rod would be used for protection from predators like wolves or wild animals, but a staff was actually used for gentle discipline and correction. And it says he makes me lie down in green pastures, and there's almost like a sense here that there's almost like a sense of resistance, almost like a sense of like, oh, I didn't want to lie down in green pastures, but he made me. You know why? That's because he knows what's best for us. He knows what really will refresh our soul. He cares more about our growth and our long-term flourishing than our short-term comfort and short-term satisfaction. And he wants to guide us. But I wonder, how much do we ask him to guide us? How much do we ask him in those everyday decisions of life to actually speak? It says in the passage, because they know his voice, that they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they'll run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. He wants to speak to us, and for us to recognize his voice. He speaks our language. I wonder, do we know his voice? And it may be different for each one of us, how we hear God. But I wonder, how much do we make space just to listen? And that's something I find such a challenge for somebody who likes to speak a lot. And I remember last year being confused about where I was going next and really desperate for God to speak into that, and was praying for God to guide me to speak. And there's a couple of options on the cards, one of them being going to Sheffield and doing New Wine Discipleship year here. And I remember just setting aside 3 days particularly to pray about it and asking God to really speak. I remember on the second day, as I went out onto a prayer walk to specifically pray about it, I ended up bumping into a mate just outside my house, even before I set off on the walk. And we ended up talking about what our plans were for next year and ended up praying for each other. And it turns out he is from Sheffield. And I didn't even realise it until about 2 minutes or so later afterwards. I was like, oh, he's from Sheffield. Maybe God's trying to say something here. And then I remember just kind of saying, God, if you're saying Sheffield, can you make that really clear? And then on the same walk, about 10 minutes or so later, I bump into Tim, who's also just moved to Sheffield to do ministry here. And then even later that evening, I remember logging onto Facebook and seeing that someone I knew had got engaged. And I wondered, I wonder where he met his fiancée. Turns out they're both from Sheffield. So then God just began to confirm it again and again. And another way that God really confirms things for me is often through little coincidences that I like to call God instances. So I remember when I first got the email saying that Will Briggs was keen to have me at the Vine, I remember finding that really funny because there was a Will Briggs in Durham. And then there's just been so many other random confirmations and coincidences that just seem like such God instances. Like Will's son, Ethan, it's funny because he did New Wine Discipleship year in Harrogate, which was where I was originally from last year. And he's also now gone to Durham, which is where I've just studied. So it's like we've literally swapped places and I'm staying in his bedroom. And even crazier than that, I was praying for another God incident, not that God hadn't already spoken enough. And it turned out he was also living with my Year 9 English teacher. That's the thing, God, he loves to reveal his plans in his timing. He loves to reveal the next step. And to be honest, I don't know what's ahead completely. I know the next step. But I can trust him because he's the one who goes before us. He's tested the path. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows all eventualities, so we don't need to know it all. God speaks through Isaiah prophetically and says, I will lead the blind by ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths, I will guide them. I will turn the darkness into light before and make the rough places smooth. These are the things I will do. I will not forsake them. He's trustworthy. He knows the plans and purposes for us, and we may be blind to him, but that's okay because he isn't. The paths may be unfamiliar to us, but they are familiar for him. He knows the path ahead. He's already gone ahead of us and has tested and trodden the path. And I find that such a comfort. We don't need to know the plans when he does. Isaiah also says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. There's nothing better than surrendering to him. There's nothing better than giving him our hopes and our dreams and our plans and allowing him to speak into them, because sometimes we may not always understand it, but his ways are higher, his thoughts are better. We don't need to have it all figured out because he already does. His leadership is perfect, even though we may not always understand it. If he's going to do immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine, sometimes things aren't going to go the way that we ask or imagine. But that's with joy and surrender, and trusting that he knows better, that he is faithful to guide us. Just as a shepherd knows better than the sheep what is really best for them, to really lead them into those green pastures that will lead them to life and flourishing. And the third way, and this is really the climax, that we really know that Jesus is this good, perfect, beautiful, noble shepherd, is that he never abandons us, even in danger. And the climax of this is really in this John 10 passage that we heard read out. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flocks and scatters it. The man runs away because he is the hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. He doesn't run away when it gets tough. In our modern day perceptions of farming, I think we can often lose sight of actually how dangerous and costly shepherding actually was. Like the shepherd would literally put his life on the line in protecting the sheep from wild animals like wolves and predators. And it was sacrificial, it was costly. That's the thing, we're not just commodities, but we're his very own masterpiece, his prized possession. How much more does God sacrifice and give himself away for us? Jesus doesn't promise us that when following him that it will always be easy. But the promise is that he will never abandon us. Sometimes it's a narrow path. Even though I walk through the valley of a shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And in this season transition, I found that moving to Sheffield, it's been really encouraging in lots of ways. And God has spoken so clearly that this is a place I'm meant to be. And there's been many ways that he's confirmed that. But also, to be honest, it's also been tough. Even behind Durham, a place that was a place where I had really deep community and really deep friendships, and a place that really felt like home for 4 years. There's been a grieving process to that. There's been a mourning process to leaving that behind. But that's okay, because it's there that he's shown me time and time again that he's with me. Just through random things, like just random coincidences again. Like even last weekend, I was walking the Botanical Gardens, ended up bumping into two people who are from Norwich who are also Christians, and that's where my parents are now, and one of them even went to the same church as my parents do. Just random ways like that, God has reminded me time and time again, I'm with you, Nick. Our confidence is that he's the one who laid down his life for us. That's the confidence that he's with us. Whatever we're going through, even in the valley. If he went through all the horror of the cross, down a humiliating, agonizing death to rescue us from shame, sin, that separation from our Heavenly Father, to lead us into the everlasting life to the full, of knowing our Heavenly Father, of living in the confidence of being fully forgiven and restored, how much more will he be with us now? He stands with us. He's the God who weeps with us. He doesn't run away in the fire or in the pressure or in the mess of our brokenness and confusion. In fact, he's even the one who would leave the 99 for the one. And there's a song called Son of Suffering that the lyrics have just been wrecking me more and more. I listen to it. It really just illustrates how he stands with us, how because of the cross, he stands with us in the pain and the suffering. He gets it. He's a man of sorrows. It says, oh, the perfect Son of God in all his innocence, here walking in the dirt with you and me. He knows what living is. He's acquainted with our grief, a man of sorrows, son of suffering. Oh, blood and tears, how can it be that there's a God who weeps, there's a God who bleeds? Oh, praise the one who would reach for me, alleluia to the son of suffering. That's our confidence. He's a man of sorrows. He becomes one of us. Some of you may have noticed a slight change in the cross here on the front. And you might be wondering why it's not even symmetrical. Basically, I made this back at uni, and it's my first time welding, and it's probably the worst welding you'll ever see. Like, it's so messy, it's not even smooth, it's rough, but this stands proudly on my desk, and some of you might be wondering why. Why do you have such a bad piece of welding on your desk? But you know what? This reminds me, actually, the cross was never neat and tidy. The cross was messy. That's how much he went through for us. Love literally bled. Love literally wept for us. Love, in all its agony, gave himself up. He laid down his life. He's so trustworthy of giving him our whole lives. And the best place to be is in complete surrender of our hopes, dreams, our hearts, our whole lives, our plans, and the one who gave his all for us. And the challenge is to keep on walking through the valley, not being stuck in the middle, knowing that his presence with us is more than enough, not waiting until we see the light, but walking until we see the light. And the amazing thing is, we only walk through a shadow of a valley of death. Have you noticed that in Psalm 23 it says a shadow of a valley of death? Because Jesus has already gone on ahead and faced death on our behalf. He's already gone through the valley so that we don't have to. He's gone through the valley of death, so we only go through a shadow, and he goes with us. Anything we go through is nothing compared to what he's already gone through. He's with us. He is Emmanuel. He's the shepherd, but he's also the lamb that was slain. So I wonder, where do we need to be reminded afresh of his goodness, of the beauty and the nobleness and the perfection of the shepherd, both individually but also corporately as his flock? For some of us, maybe we need to be reminded of how much Jesus really knows us, how much he really cares for us in the littlest of details, how much we're his prized possession, and then also that invitation to really know him intimately. For some of us, maybe we need to remind of how good a guide Jesus is, that he knows what's best for us, that he is worthy of our surrender of plans and hopes and our dreams, that he is faithful to guide us in his perfect timing. Or maybe we need to be reminded again of his presence with us. Maybe you're in a valley and this is a tough time for many of us as we're lamenting on the back of COVID. Maybe we need to be reminded of how he's the one who'll never abandon us because he laid down his life. Maybe we need to be reminded as we're walking through the valley to keep on walking. Maybe we need to be reminded again of the cross in all its messiness, in all the agony that he went through. Maybe we need to be reminded that he's the shepherd, but he's also the lamb that was slain. He's trustworthy. He's good. Father, I thank you for that truth. Thank you for such a confidence that gives us, that you are a good shepherd. So I pray that wherever we need to be reminded of that afresh, that you would just come and reveal that afresh. You'd help us to surrender those cares afresh to you, knowing that you guide us, that you know us, and that you won't abandon us. Amen.